Hello, everyone. Will you all please take your seats? We are going to start the program soon. Thank you very much. I am Madhu Sridhar, the President of the League of Women Voters of San Antonio, and on behalf of the League, I welcome you all this Saturday morning because it's a very important subject that we'll be talking about, and I appreciate the fact that you all have taken the time to come and join us, and I certainly hope it is a productive morning for you and you feel that it was worth coming and attending. We have a lot of material that we will be going over. For those of you who do not know the League of Women Voters, I just want to share with you that League of Women Voters is a non-partisan organization. We neither support nor oppose any political party or any candidate. So we are completely and very strictly non-partisan. The mission of the League is to encourage informed and active participation in your government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we influence public policy through education and advocacy. And it is in this spirit that we have organized this forum on redistricting, a subject that is extremely important in the upcoming year. And we all need to get involved, get educated, and actively participate in the changes that might be made. This program was organized by the Program Committee of the League of Women Voters of San Antonio in collaboration with the State League of Women Voters. And we have brought an absolutely fabulous panel. Evelyn Bonavita, who is the Vice President for our Program and Action and also chairs the Program Committee, should be credited with putting together this absolutely fabulous program. The Program Committee worked very hard along with Stephanie Swanson from the State League to put together this program. So at this point, I would like Evelyn to come and tell you briefly about what how the event will take place. Thank you very much.
First of all, I'm going to explain to you how to do the parking ticket that you all got, that you can get 3 hours of free parking, but you have to take your ticket around the first floor, around to the computer section, and there's a machine there, and you insert your ticket, and it stamps it. Otherwise, you have a bunch of problems when you try to leave. So be sure when you leave here to get your 3 hours, however long you... I just know that it's not anything that's very clear to people who are coming, so please bear that in mind. And secondly, we're handing out index cards. Please write down questions you have for the panelists, and then we will pick them up and hand them to these nice ladies over here who will be sure that we're not all asking the same question. We will not deny anyone the opportunity to ask a question. We just want to be sure that not all the same ones. I'm here mainly, though, to introduce our moderator, Mr. Al Kaufman. In your program, I hope everybody has one, there is a short bio of Mr. Kaufman, and I wanted to say that I went online to look him up to see what I could add to it. 5 pages. 5 pages of honors and awards, publications, op-eds, and incidentally, places like Harvard and the University of California. So I think he needs no introduction. Mr. Kaufman, would you like to come up here and moderate this panel?
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor, and the League of Women Voters have been very kind to ask me to participate in their activities, and highest respect for their work. We have a really wonderful panel today, and I'm going to introduce them very briefly, then I'm going to make a few very short remarks, and then they're going to explain all you need to know in 2 minutes each. So please listen, listen very carefully, and then we'll have our question and answer period. I'm going to ask a few questions to get it started, and we'll go from there. So I want to introduce them one by one. The person directly to my right is Dr. Rogelio Sáenz. He's probably the leading Latino demographer in the country right now. He's at UTSA, he used to be at A&M. He's moving uphill. And so we're very glad to have him here, and he is probably the person who will know the most about the changing demographics of the state and where that is happening. Next to him, we have Mr. Jose Garza. Jose Garza has been working on voting rights in Texas for now about 40 years. He was at MALDEF. He has represented the Mexican-American Legislative Council in all of the recent rounds of redistricting. I know personally he worked in the redistricting in the 80, 90, 2000, 2010, and although he says he might not, I'm sure he's going to be involved in 2021, and I'm committing him to it right now. Okay, next we have Mr. Joaquin Gonzalez. He's worked with the Texas Civil Rights Project. He couldn't get into St. Mary's Law School, so he had to go to Yale Law School, but we're willing to accept that. He comes from a fairly famous family in San Antonio called Gonzalez. You might have heard of a few of the Gonzalez's through the years, but he's been very actively working on voting rights in the legislature and in the community, and is going to work very closely with the League on these future activities. Next to him, we have Stephanie Swanson. Stephanie is with the League of Women Voters. She is handling for the League of Women Voters this effort called Fair Maps Texas Coalition. By the way, that's not an oxymoron, Fair Maps Texas, or at least they're trying to make it less of an oxymoron. And she works with legislative and advocacy efforts at both the state and national levels. Senator will be here very soon. Jose Menendez, he is senator for District 26, which includes this area and is all of north and northwest San Antonio. He was a former state rep. I think he was on the city council. He's now on the Senate Redistricting Committee. Very active person both on immigration rights, redistricting rights, and a wide range of other activities. And to hear someone who will be on the other side of the panel to ask questions at these hearings, I think will be very important for you. So basically, we're going to redistrict again. Here's Senator Menendez. So I'm going to out him here. He's coming in, but here he is. Very busy schedule. So let me give you just a briefest introduction of what some of these issues are. We're going to redistrict in 2021. The redistricting will all occur in a month and a half. Democracy will be flourishing during this month and a half. But the census results, the difficulty is, the census is going to be April of 2020. The census results don't come out until the middle of April 2021, and then the state has to get together and redistrict the State House of Representatives, the State Senate, the congressional districts, and the Texas State Board of Education, all within just 6 weeks. Now, the fact is, most groups in Texas already have their plans based on present census information, but it's a real madhouse. So I think this will be important to have you get more involved in that process. So that is why we're here, to try to help educate people to get them involved in the process. So I'm going to start now with some questions for each one of our panelists. Opening statement. I'm sorry, you're right. Apologize. Okay. I was going to cut off their time and save it for myself, but okay. Thank you. Okay. No, each one of the panelists gets this 2-minute statement to begin with, and I think I'll just go down the row the way I introduced them. Is that okay? Okay. So, Rogelio, can you give us your 2-minute statement to begin with, and we'll go on to Jose from there.
Examining the redistricting. There are microphones. All right.
All right, in examining the issue of redistricting, I focus on the population changes that represent the numbers that are used for the redistricting, as well as the maps that come out of that process. As was the case in the last census, and the one before that, and the one before that, and even the one earlier than that, the trends that we will see in 2020 will be similar and, in fact, more powerful in certain respects. It'll be what we'll see will be the growth of the state's population is primarily due to growth in its Latino and more broadly on its non-white population, while whites once again will account for a relatively minute segment of the state's population increase. In the past, Republican strategists have created magic out of these numbers, taking these numbers that are potentially not very friendly towards their party and turning them into Rorschach-like maps. So we saw one over there, and there are a few others that advantage whites in the Republican Party and that disadvantage people of color and the Democratic Party. I have data that I'll save for the panel discussion that'll take a look at some of the population trends that are going on in the state. But it is very clear that what demographers have been talking about for the last several decades is now here. So that we find, for example, in Texas, because of an aging white population, we find very, very slow population growth, as well as in some cases population decline. And redistricting is very important when it comes to the 2020 census, because of the issues that we find, such as the citizenship question that has been tossed out, that will not be, but it's already in some way entered the conversation, as well as the state of Texas deciding not to invest money in the complete count of the state's population and so forth. These, of course, are very much tied into the redistricting and the numbers that we're likely to see.
So, you want me to go?
Proceed, please.
We all know that the right to vote is one of the most important rights that we have. President Reagan, for example, called it the crown jewel of civil liberties. In Texas, though, the right to vote is considered and enforced as a privilege, not as a right. And the people in power decide who is going to exercise that privilege. And this has happened historically since Jim Crow all the way to the present. In the 2010 redistricting, everybody was talking about the increases in the Latino population, in the minority population across the state, and we were all thankful for that growth because that meant that Texas was going to get 4 more congressional seats to the delegation in the United States Congress. And everybody thought those are going to include at least 2 minority new congressional seats, and maybe 3, because after all, 80% of the population growth in Texas was from the Mexican-American and African-American community. Certainly, that would entitle us to that sort of representation. When the redistricting occurred in 2010, however, the state of Texas drew one additional minority opportunity district, and only after it was sued, and reduced the number of Latino opportunity districts in the Texas House of Representatives by a net loss of 4 districts, even though all of the growth in Texas had been from the minority community. But it's not just redistricting. The state of Texas, almost every legislative session passes laws that restrict the right to vote to the minority community. The voter ID law was hotly contested and litigated. Some of our witnesses included a man, for instance, by the name of Margarito Lara. Margarito Lara was very poor. He was very elderly. Margarito Lara, one of the joys of his life was getting up on election day and walking to the nearby polling place and showing his voter registration card and voting. And everybody knew Margarito. Everybody at the polling place knew Margarito. When the voter ID law was passed, Margarito didn't have the license or the other IDs that he needed to vote. And so he missed an election, he missed another election, and he missed a third election until we got a judgment from the federal court saying you can't be denied the right to vote simply because you don't have these IDs. Unfortunately, Margarito passed away. So the last 3 elections of his life, he was unable to vote because of the restrictive election laws that Texas passes.
Gonzalez?
So I just want to, I guess, go back and build a little bit off of what Mr. Kaufman was saying about the process itself for redistricting. And as he mentioned, they do the census over the course of 2020, but the data itself doesn't come out until between February and April of 2021. And then the legislature, the state legislature, has responsibility for drawing district maps for 4 bodies: the U.S. Congress, the state House of Representatives, the state Senate, and the State Board of Education. And because of the state constitution, the legislature has to draw state House and state Senate maps by the end of the regular session, which is the end of May 2021. So they only have a couple months that they can do this. And if they fail to do that, then a group called the Legislative Redistricting Board draws the maps, and that's composed of the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, the Attorney General, and the comptroller. And so, you know, obviously, that's probably not going to be the fairest group of map drawers out there. So there's a real time crunch there. And leading up to next legislative session, they hold these field hearings around the state. And in the past, and they got in trouble in this in the litigation in 2010 that it's just recently really come to a close, but it's basically been a useless process. Part of that is that we don't have data to actually talk about real features of maps because we don't know exactly where the population is. There are projections, but it's nothing final. And so in the past, what they've done is, you know, had these sort of semi-useless public field hearings, then got into session and ignored everything that was said and done things behind closed doors and rushed things through with no public comment. So what we've really been focusing on is how we can improve this process leading up to it to make sure that when the rubber meets the road and they're actually drawing maps, it's not the same closed door process and the public and groups have a real chance to give their input into it.
So I want to build off of Joaquin, what he's been talking about, and I want to give you a little more background on the public input hearings. So the League will always fight to improve the process wherever we can. We missed our chance to get reform through in 2019, any sort of reform. We would really appreciate an independent redistricting commission like Senator Menendez filed legislation for. We knew that that was a long shot. And so now that we're stuck with the redistricting process that we have, we took a look at it and said, how can we improve this process here and now? How can we make it more honest, more open, and more fair? So these public input hearings are a great opportunity. And yes, I know that they might not accept our public testimony, but we have to try. If they don't listen to us, we can always take this evidence, this testimony to our state representatives and our state senators and say, please keep this in mind moving forward. These are our communities, these are where they are located. So going back to the public input hearings, the Texas House Redistricting Committee decided to hold organizational hearings for the next round of redistricting to come up with a plan on where they're going to have these public input hearings. So I show up, not many people are there. Chairman King says he's going to hold 3 organizational hearings. At the second organizational hearing, he comes in, he adopts a list of cities for these public input hearings without taking any information, any testimony from the public like he said he was going to do. So we immediately raised a red flag. We said, whoa, wait a second there. So on top of that, these hearings were going to be held in Beaumont, Lufkin, Marshall, Rockport, very small cities that not many people are there. And in the meantime, our huge metroplex areas, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, Fort Worth, they each get one. He says, yes, we'll come back and we might hold more, but we wanted to get them to commit to our metroplex areas because that is where most of our growth has been. He ignored us again and again. We wrote I think 2 letters, he ignored us. So finally, I believe you were involved in the bail-in hearing recently in May. I got a story on a statewide NPR about them ignoring us and about them repeating the same mistakes that they were making in 2011. And within a week, the press got a hold of their public hearing schedule. They doubled the number of cities. Not only that, but he finally wrote us another letter, and he said that he's going to give us 1 month public notice for these hearings. He's posting notice in both English and Spanish. Now all of our major metroplex areas will have multiple hearings. So please help us take advantage of the road and the process or the improvement that we've made moving forward and take advantage of this, please.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, let's give a round of applause. First of all, I was running a little late because there was a breakfast this morning where Congressman Doggett and former Congressman Gonzalez and a few as a labor breakfast, AFL-CIO, and it was funny because at that breakfast he was asked, how many times have you been redistricted? And it's 3 or 4, once known into a district known as the fajita or bacon strip because it went all the way from Austin down to the valley. Yeah, is it right there? There it is. Yeah. So let's look at the facts. Let's take emotion out of this. Let's just look at facts, okay? If we look at all the votes cast in the 2018 election for congressional candidates, Republicans received 53% of the votes in Texas and Democrats 47%. If all 36 of our congressional delegation seats were divided proportionally to the votes that were allocated by Texans, there would be 19 Republican members of Congress and 17 Democrats. Instead, Texas has 23 Republicans and 13 Democrats representing us in Washington. So that shows you that why the courts have cracked down on Texas-drawn maps every decade since the 1960s for violating the Voting Rights Act restrictions on diluting minority voting strength and gerrymandering along racial lines, which is why this is so necessary, everything that we're doing. I don't think I need to tell anybody here that the essence of partisan gerrymandering is manipulating the lines around voters to elect whoever your party wants to be their candidate. It amplifies the political party that is in power beyond what it deserves on a vote of share alone. And politicians can influence the elections by how they're drawing district lines by using 2 main tactics, packing and cracking. And it sounds disgusting, but it is what it is. Packing concentrates a large number of supporters in an opposing party in one district, so they'll take a Democratic area and they'll make it 80%. As much as they can, they'll pack as many Democrats so there'll be fewer around to have a competitive seat somewhere else. Cracking dilutes the voting power of opposing parties. So there's a lot of information here. I've just been given the stop sign. I'm glad you're here. We have a lot of work to do, and I do have some dates from some hearings that are coming up, and I think your input does make a difference.
Thank you. Well, with the questions, I'm going to start with 1 question for each person, and then open it up to all of you. There are not many cards yet, so be sure to fill out your cards with your questions, and we will get to. Thank you. So I'm going to start with Dr. Sines. Dr. Sines, what percentage of the population after the 2020 census do you think will be Latino?
Right now it seems that when we're looking at the 2018 data, we're talking about 39, 40% of the population. But by the time we're talking about the 2020 census, I think it'll be probably about 40% of the state's population will be Latino.
Okay, and what percent African American?
African Americans will be about 12% of the Texas population.
So it'll be officially a majority minority.
Yeah,
state.
which Texas already has been for some time in terms of officially non-minorities or non-whites being the majority group.
Just short question for Jose Garza. Jose, given those statistics, if Latinos are 40% of the population and there are 150 state reps, then there should be 60 Mexican-American districts. Do you think that's the way it'll happen?
Most assuredly not. So in Texas, one of the things that the senator was mentioning was how these lines are manipulated. And he talked about cracking and packing. The state's redistricting and the local redistricting have very sophisticated computer equipment that gets down to the block level. Okay, how's that? Is that better? All right. So because of this very sophisticated computer redistricting data, the map drawers can go down to the block level to figure out how to move populations around. Recently, the Supreme Court said that political gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of federal courts. So if they're doing this for political reasons, there's nothing in terms of the law that you can do about it. But Texas and its map drawers already knew that. They already knew that this was the excuse they could use. So when you get down to the block level, you don't have political data. What you have is racial data. So I know we like to cloud these things with partisan purposes, but it's always been about race. It's always been about race. When Democrats were in control, minorities were the butt of their redistricting. When Republicans are in control, it's minorities that suffer the biggest burdens of their redistricting. So that's a long answer to your question. No, we won't have 60 districts that are representing minority voters.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Gonzalez, people are going to go testify before this House committee to talk about redistricting. What do they need to know about the law in this area or the facts in this area that will really present their case most strongly to these legislative committees?
Well, I think one important thing is all the stuff that Jose has been talking about, the history that Texas has been found in violation of the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act in every redistricting cycle since the 1970s, and of course they were in violation before that, but there wasn't a Voting Rights Act around. So I think highlighting that the public is aware of all of this, and we've already seen the legislature take moves like this last session. They passed a bill that increased legislative privilege, which is, for Public Information Act requests when members of the public or the media are trying to get information from the legislature, they can invoke legislative privilege as an exception to that. And sort of, it flew under the radar really this last session, but they passed a bill that would increase that. We saw recently there's this conservative group called ALEC that has, they go around and recommend things to state legislatures, and they were recommending that the legislators destroy all their emails and basically hide all the evidence. And so I think we need to let them know that people are watching this and that we're aware of the tricks that they've used in the past and are going to be demanding that they not employ those same tricks to hide the ball on what they're doing.
Ms. Swanson, for you, you're going to be educating people to go to these meetings and talk to the state representatives. What do the people going to the meetings most need to learn about how to work with the political process, to talk to the legislators and to talk to the senators?
Well, the background on redistricting, I think, will be very important. That will help you set up a good dialogue and a foundation to work from. So I just want to point out really quick my plug. In your folders, you have two guides. One's on nonpartisan criteria that the League is very much supporting and promoting. And that's very important. So going in and talking about ethnic groups is a very good start, but in order to have a true community of interest, you need to outline other things in your community besides just ethnic groups. So I would point out where your schools are, where your hospital is, and our guide is in there, and it walks you through it, and it gives you an explanation and an example testimony, basically. But then also there's stuff that Joaquin from the Texas Civil Rights Project has included as well, on stuff that we would like to see them do to improve the process and make it more transparent and inclusive. So that's my quick plug. I think most importantly, though, if you go into these hearings and you tell them how this current map has impacted you personally, that is one of the most important things that you can do. If you go in there and speak the truth and from your heart, that actually makes legislators stop what they're doing and listen to stories. So that's the number one thing I can definitely recommend.
Senator Menendez, just two questions for you. The first one, I think you have a proposal on redistricting for the legislature. Can you explain what that is about and why you suggest that the legislature pass that?
Sure, and maybe you could talk about not this specific proposal, but one similar. So just so that you know a little bit, the bills that I filed would have created a redistricting commission to take the process out of the hands of the politicians. We studied what California did, we studied what Colorado did, and we tried to come up with a Texas solution. It would have precluded any elected official, candidate, lobbyist, staff, or any large donor from serving on the commission. The commission would have been made up of...
Excluded?
Excluded.
Excluded,
yes.
okay.
Excluded anybody that fit in that category. The commission would have been made up of 5 people from the majority party, 5 from the minority, and 4 independents. The members would have to reflect racial, ethnic, geographic, and gender diversity. Each map would have to be approved by at least 9 members of the commission, at least 3 of each minority, majority, and independent. And outlined a process for public outreach and input, including hearings in each Senate district, which means they'd be in 31 parts of the state. And it would be a criteria for districts to include population, equity, geographic integrity, compactness, and communities of interest. I think, look, for folks, if you want to ask yourself, well, where do they practice dividing communities? One area, I can tell you an area that's just interesting how they've decided. They've taken Loop 410 and put half of the Castle Hills inside in one district, and on the north side, it's outside one district. Those of you familiar with the Great Northwest, largest neighborhood association in San Antonio, along Culebra, Tezel, out in the northwest part of the city, at one point, they ran the lines in an almost like a snake-like version to divvy it up into 4. But the most egregious version is that when the hatred that is shown for Travis County, by taking and putting Travis County, which could be 1 congressional district, and putting it into 6 congressional districts. Yeah, so taking bits and pieces, just dividing Travis County up and saying, we have such little respect and so much disdain for you that you're not gonna have your own particular congressperson to represent you. And that's how they've done what they, I'm sorry, you had a second question.
No, just one more quick question. As a member of the Senate Redistricting Committee, what do you feel that people who come before you need to tell the members of the committee about this process?
I really enjoyed the comments that came. You know, one of the things that happens is many times, because we want to make sure we don't forget something, we write down, like I have, our notes, but the worst thing we can do is read our notes. And because what I would recommend is that if you really want them to see what you've written in terms of, you have statistics, if you have how it's affected you personally, make sure you have a copy for every member of the committee. So if you know that you're coming to testify before the Senate, then you'll know that we have, let me see, I've counted here, we have 17 members of the Senate Redistricting Committee, so have 17 packets. So you hand them out, but you tell them, I'm not gonna read you because I know you know how to read. I'm gonna tell you what's happened to me. And that way, you'll get more of their attention. If you get up there and you start reading line for line and you're looking down at your paper, they'll probably look down at their paper. You may lose them. And stories are a good thing. The other thing I would do is recruit someone that doesn't normally vote the same way you do, but believes the same way you do about redistricting. And believe me, there are people who are just as frustrated about redistricting on both sides and independents, because we all know that this committee, the Senate Committee on Redistricting, has got 10 Republicans and 7 Democrats. But it's important for the Republicans to hear from people from their own side saying, I don't like the way you pack these districts either. Because what's happening is the only thing that matters is the primary. And so they're having to run further and further to the right just to get through their primary, and it may not be exactly what they want to see.
Thank you. I have a few questions from the audience, and I guess we'll pursue from that. I guess this will be for either Jose Garza or Rogelio. First, the question was, what's the legal constitutional definition of a voting district and precinct? And the other question is, census tracts, should there be a requirement that you cannot split census tracts when you draw a redistricting system? So, Rogelio, you want to start with that, give it to Jose, or Jose, you start, go ahead.
I don't know that I would be better at answering this question, but I'm going to give it a shot. So a district is essentially the boundaries of the voters for a particular elected body. For city council, a precinct could be, District 1. But there are, subparts of that. A voting precinct is the boundaries of a district that show who the voters are of that particular precinct. I think that a census tract unit is so large that in some instances that it would be unworkable to have a legal principle that says you can't divide those units. One of the things that's interesting about all of this discussion is that all of the rules and principles and ideas that you hear, that we tell you, really are, they could be changed in the blink of an eye in a courtroom. So the district court in San Antonio, when it was drawing interim plans, because the state of Texas's plans were illegal, decided that a good government principle that they would apply is try not to divide voting precincts. Because when you divide a voting precinct, those things have to be redone, and voters are accustomed to going to a polling place and being in a voting place. And every time you divide up a polling place, that causes confusion. And so one of the principles that they used in drawing their interim plan was, let's try to keep everywhere we can voting precincts intact. Let's not change those. Those are small enough so that we can manipulate them and draw districts that comply with one person, one vote, et cetera, et cetera. The Supreme Court reversed them on that. The United States Supreme Court says you cannot dictate to the legislative body that they cannot split precincts. Splitting precincts is something that they have the right to do. And moreover, as I mentioned earlier, partisan gerrymandering is beyond the scope of judicial review now, because that's what the Supreme Court of the United States says.
That was just this June.
Just this June. There are all these lawsuits from Maryland, from Pennsylvania, from North Carolina, all of them in which they showed exactly the kinds, or even worse, of the disparities that Senator Menendez talked about that we have in Texas on our congressional delegation. Evidence that was very strong about partisan gerrymandering, and the Supreme Court says that's out of bounds. They can do that. And the reason I said the state of Texas has always known that is because that's the excuse they've always used when they fracture a minority community, when they pack a minority community. Yes, we've done that, but it wasn't for racial reasons. That would be illegal. We did it for partisan reasons. And by the way, we think that's legal. And sure enough, the Supreme Court this year said absolutely right. It's right.
Rogelio?
Yeah, there's another issue here, and this has to do with the population that is used to create those particular districts. And there has been there was a court case several years ago that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Sue Evenwell, that was suing the state of Texas. And then what she was trying to do is propose that it would be only eligible voters that would be used to construct the political district. So it would be individuals 18 and over and individuals that are U.S. citizens. And you could really see how that proposal would really shift and would do away a lot of the population growth that we see. In the state of Texas, 86% of the growth this decade has been due to the Latino population. Only 14% of the growth has been due to the white population. So these kinds of manipulation in terms of who constitutes the population that is used to create those districts are used to try to overcome those demographic kind of shifts. And I think that the citizenship question that was thrown out was also used part to bring about an undercount of the population that now is timid or scared to participate, and the other was to also, as a step, to eventually go back and try to get that population, the eligible voter population, to be the population that is used to construct political districts instead of what the Constitution says. That means everybody, regardless of their age, citizenship, etc.
Dr. Stein, I'm going to follow up just 1 second on that, and then we'll go to Senator Menendez. Because of all the discussion about the citizenship question on the census, there was concern that certain populations would be intimidated, wouldn't want to answer the census. There still is going to be some effect from that. So can you give your opinion on what effect it would have if undocumented persons who happen to be Latino do not participate in the census, both in terms of redistricting and other issues?
Yeah. So the question was proposed by the Trump administration, and it went through the court systems and so forth, and finally, then it was pulled out about a month ago or so. But the damage has already been done. The damage has already been done in the sense that was already part of the discourse. And part of these strategies that are used to inhibit the vote of people of color as well as the poor is to create this confusion as well. So in the voter ID, people are, oh, I don't know if I'm eligible or not, or and there's a penalty also if I do. So it creates all this illusion and confusion. And I think that has already been done with the citizenship question. And in addition, people do not trust that if they're here undocumented or they have a family member, that they're not going to come for them and they're not going to be rounded up and so forth. So the work that we have to do to assure people of the importance of the census and so forth is double as hard or more than it has been in previous censuses. And what we would have if we do not count the undocumented population as accurately as we can for the state of Texas is a major impact. We're talking about the representation of the state. Jose mentioned that the last decennial census, Texas gained 4 congressional seats. Right now, Texas is slated to gain 3 congressional seats. Population demographic work that has been done on if only half of the undocumented population participates in the census, that would be reduced to 2 congressional seats instead of 3. And we can also talk about the millions and millions and millions of dollars that the state of Texas is going to leave on the table if the undocumented are counted. And that is not only the undocumented, but we're talking about people of color, the poor, et cetera, that have traditionally been undercounted.
Thank you. Senator Menendez, I know because we're in the state of Texas, which firmly believes in democracy, have you found that, are you in the Texas Senate going to develop committees, full count committees? Many states, my wife's here, she's on the National Board of Common Cause. In many states, they have very active full count committees. Get out there, make sure people are counted. What can the Senate do to try to make sure people are counted? And what can you do to make sure your fellow senators are aware of these possible undercounts?
So both the Texas House, we had a state representative file a full count committee bill. I believe there may have been one in the Senate as well. The bills never got a hearing because there was not an interest by leadership in Texas to have a full count. And what is mind-boggling is that if you look at, for example, California, I believe, is investing $150 million in a full count. And the reason is that and you know, when Dr. Science talks about the millions, they may be in the billions, Dr. Science, of money that we're leaving. So you ask yourself, what are they talking about? Well, what money are we leaving on the table? Well, CDBG, Community Block Development Grant dollars, and HUD dollars, those are allocated on a per capita basis. So the city, based on the growth that you have in your state, that's how much more money you get, so that Councilman Courage and his colleagues can say, we need more sidewalks here in this community, this park is dilapidated, affordable housing needs to be addressed, we need to make some subsidies to really have people be able to afford to live in a quality, safe place. These are the things we're leaving on the table. Tax credits are apportioned on a per capita basis. Highway dollars are apportioned on a per capita basis. So we're leaving billions of dollars lying on the table just because they don't want to have the right number of congressional delegates, because they're afraid to lose their power. I mean, literally, this is all because they're afraid to lose their power. So this is a concerted effort in certain states where if you look at the party in power, they are not making an effort for a complete count. And you look at the other states, and the state, not only the states, the counties, the cities are all making a concentrated effort. The only good news that I can tell you is our cities and counties in Texas are making an effort to have a complete count. And me personally, and I think some of my colleagues, we're doing everything we can to help them. So I've said to the people in the complete count and the census committee having to do with San Antonio, let us know what we can do. You know, we'll make our resources available. We need to do what we can. I'll do, PSAs in Spanish. I'll go into communities where they'll say, I have to say, and Dr. Science is absolutely correct. A lot of families in primarily Hispanic communities may have 5 or 6 people living in the home, maybe more, maybe less, and 90% of them may be fine in terms of the documentation, but there may be one person who is in the process or who just had a document lapse or who is just waiting for a response and is not 100%, and the rest of those folks, they're not going to put that abuelita or tia or tío at risk. They're going to say, the hell with that, keep your census. No one lives here. Leave us alone. And then people are going to come and knock, and they're going to be like, no. And it's going to require them to see people who they trust to say, it's going to be okay. No one's going to come. No one's going to know. We're not asking the question. You don't have to worry about that. No one cares. We just need to know how many people live here. And the interesting thing is that at the beginning of this country, of this experiment that we have, that we love as our country, the founding leaders of this country were smart enough to know that it didn't matter what their status was legally in this country. It mattered is how many people do we need, so we know how many roads to build, how many schools to build, how many hospitals to build. The infrastructure that we need is based on how many people are living here. And that's what's mind-boggling, that politics is corrupted, this whole decision-making, even on how many people live in our country. And that is disgusting.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to briefly introduce 2 people awfully quickly. We have Dr. Charles Cottrell here, who was the leading voting rights expert in the United States in the 70s and 80s, and the former president of St. Mary's University. My wife, Olga, is on the National Board of Common Cause and the State Board of Common Cause. Okay, and Councilman Courage is also here, so I'll get So I want to make sure we talk to Ms. Swanson and Mr. Gonzalez, so let me ask you all. Let me start with you, Mr. Gonzalez. What do you think would be the difference if there was an open primary here in Texas, as there is, I think, in California, where regardless of party you can enter the primary? Do you think that would make any difference? And I'll let any of the other panelists follow up on that. Mr. Gonzalez? Ms. Swanson? Either one? Please.
Have an open primary where people can go and vote in either primary. Are you talking about the top 2 primaries that they implemented?
I'm talking about where you can vote for Democrats and Republicans in the same primary.
So that's the top 2. It's like, I think they call it a jungle. I thought that was your question. Okay, we have an open primary, and I'll let you take over. Do you want to take that?
To tell you the truth, I haven't given it all that much thought. I don't know that I'd have that much useful to say.
Okay. Well, let me,
Wait, I'll take it.
any of the other panels? Go ahead, Ms. Swanson.
So part of my research, and I'm always trying to get the league to look into other voting systems like ranked choice voting and stuff like this, and Grace, our president's like, no, Stephanie, you can't do that. So the top 2 primaries would be a good start, I think, to making the playing field a little more level. You'd want to make it more broader than that to make it a top 4 primary. So there was a research that came out of, funny enough, the Harvard Business School There was a famous professor that looked at how to optimize any competitive system. His models have been implemented in hospitals and other governments around the world. And so he tried to look at our two-party system and figure out ways to make it more competitive. Funny enough, redistricting wasn't really at the top of their list, but they really endorsed stuff like top 4 nonpartisan primaries. The only problem with that, because Tracy Weston, who was also on the U.S. Board of Common Cause, was in California at the time that was implemented. And he said it's very important, though, that you still hold on to that DR after your name, because that is a good indicator for people. People usually associate with D or R. But in terms of competition, I greatly think I think it would greatly help our two-party duopoly that we have right now. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question is sort of a set of questions. I think they're related, and I'll start with Senator Menendez and then ask any of the other panelists. The first question is: there's an assumption that Latinos would be Democrats. Why is that the assumption? Secondly, if there's a large area of Latinos or minorities, why wouldn't that possibly be a GOP district? And the next, the census counts non-citizens. Why should they be included? So I'll let you start with that, Senator Menendez, and then any of the other panelists.
The first one was, it appears to be an assumption that, well, Latinos are not monolithic. End of story. They pray differently, they vote differently, they think differently. I mean, they're just, you know, you're a Latino, you can be from Mexico, you can be Central America, you can be from Spain, you can be from Puerto Rico, Cuba, wherever. You're not monolithic. And so, no, I don't assume that just because they're Latino, they're going to vote a certain way. What I think and what I love about what Jose said earlier is that we just don't respect when we're breaking up the communities, when we're saying to a community in, well, this one's not the best one, I mean, but the one in the Valley, where you're going to tell the folks from the Valley, your congressman has to live in Austin or is from Austin 4 hours away because we said so, because we don't respect you enough to give you your own district. At the end of the day, I want voters to vote however they want to vote, whatever, but at least respect their communities. And so, I'm sorry, the second and third, fourth question?
Well, I want to get to the question about the census counts non-citizens. Why should they be included in the census?
I thought I mentioned it, but I'll re-emphasize it. The purpose of the census is to know how many roads, how many schools, how many public facilities, what structures we need. I mean, the purpose of the census is to count how many people are living in your country so that you know how to appropriately apply resources. I mean, it would make no sense whatsoever to divvy up the money, let's say, on a state-by-state basis and say, Montana, you have more, let's say, cows and wild horses than you do have people, but we're going to give you the same amount of money we're going to give California or Texas, where half the nation's population is. You know, California is sitting on, what, maybe 60 million people. Texas has got about 30 million people. But yet we have to be smart. We have to apportion. Any of you that ever get stuck in traffic and you're sitting there wondering, why am I still stuck in traffic? Why don't I have the funds? Why does Texas not have a better public transportation system? Why don't we do more things like HOV and other things that would be smarter in terms of moving traffic along and letting people that buy hybrids or that decide they're going to have 2 or 3 people in their car help us alleviate the problem? We're just not doing those things. And without a proper census count, it is almost like just having our head in the ground.
Dr. Sines, you want to follow up on that, about why non-citizens should be counted in the census?
Yeah, again, constitutionally, we're looking at everybody, regardless of their age, regardless of their citizenship status and so forth, is required to be to be counted. And I agree totally with Senator Menendez that it has to do, again, with the distribution of funds for these kinds of facilities, for roads, services, etc. And in addition, the other point is that just like everybody else, they're also making contributions in terms of paying taxes and so forth, regardless of whether or not they're citizens.
Thank you very much. Jose, I have a tougher question for you. I don't know the answer to this. How are inmates treated when they redistrict the census? The inmates in, I guess, in Huntsville and other cities, how are they counted?
So generally, The inmates, so if the population is determined by they're counted. So if they're in a particular facility on census day, they're counted to be in that facility, and that is part of the population of that general area. But it's more so we're here talking about redistricting, and I assume that these questions are aimed at that particular task that we're going to have in a few years. And a lot of times, inmates are not included in the count for a redistricting plan. I mean, that sometimes there are specific decisions made to exclude them in the counts. But they're in the population. I mean, so a jurisdiction would have to take an affirmative step to exclude them from a redistricting map. But they would look at a area and make determinations about what the population of that area is. And I don't know what the legal consequences of that would be, because I don't think that that's been litigated yet. But if I might, the prior question, I think, had sort of a redistricting angle to it that I think we've missed in our answer so far, and about non-citizens being included in not just the count. I think it's an easier argument to make that everybody should be counted, because there's all sorts of reasons that we do for establishing a census. But then the second question, the second tier question of that actually was raised, as Rogelio mentioned earlier, in the Evanwell case. What is the base population that we use for redistricting? And it also implicates the inmate question. Do we use non-citizens in how we decide to allocate power and divide into districts? And there is an argument that reached the Supreme Court in the last redistricting session that argued that only citizens or only voters should be included in the redistricting process. And the Supreme Court said, well, the state of Texas, that was a case specifically out of the state of Texas, because the plaintiffs in that case were arguing that only citizens should be used in the population database that we're going to use to divide up our population to create districts. And the Supreme Court said the state of Texas has made the decision to use total population, and it's within their discretion, and therefore the plaintiffs lost. But it left open the question, if the state of Texas decides on its own to use only citizen and only voter data, the Supreme Court has not ruled on that. And why is that problematic? Because there was recently a report of a social scientist, a political scientist, who was hired by a very conservative funder who funds lots of Republican and conservative campaigns. He was hired to do a study on what would happen if you used only citizen or only voter population to draw districts. And he used Texas as his model. What would happen in Texas if Texas had only used citizenship data or voter data to create districts? And what he found was that we have 36 Hispanic state representatives. We would have 30 if we'd only used citizenship data. And one of the things that he said in his paper was, jurisdictions that want to do this, that want to limit Hispanic voting, that's what he put in his paper, are disadvantaged because we don't identify citizens in the questionnaire for our census. That's where the origin of the census question, give us your citizenship, came from that study, from that professor who was hired by that funder. The underlying purpose of that question was to limit Latino opportunity at the voting box. And it was based on a study modeled on Texas.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Amaya, you wanted to talk, will you explain a little bit more about the inmate question for us, please?
Well, I just want to add on to that just really quick. So our state constitution, and Joaquin is the one that pointed this out, I think our state house districts have to be based on total population, just to kind of give everyone a reassure you guys, we're thinking about that problem heavily, a lot, but our state house districts most likely have to be drawn based on total population. So that's one good thing.
Yeah, just on the jail, the inmate population issue, this, I think it was in 2010, this actually makes a big difference. So states have leeway whether they count their inmates as residents of the jail or as residents in their home counties, wherever they came from before they were incarcerated. And so, for instance, in 2010, Harris County had 25 state representatives, and it was just on the border. For the state house, they do it, they apportion them by county, and to the extent possible, all the districts have to be within a county. And so Harris was just on the verge between 24 and 25 because relative to the rest of the state, it had lost some population. And if they had counted inmates across the state as at their home residences, which makes sense, I think, because that's where they're going to return. That's, yeah. Well, and I think they do it differently based on, it's not every inmate, but inmates that are temporarily incarcerated. If they had counted them at their home, then Harris County would have been big enough to keep its 25th district. And if they didn't, which is what they didn't do, and counted them in the place where they're inmates, then Harris County lost a district. And so that's what happened, and that was, I believe, a majority-minority district. They ended up combining and running two incumbents against each other, and it decreased the number of minority districts in Harris. And other states have laws that they have to count them in their home residence, but it's not, and it's something I'm pretty sure is not set out by law in Texas, but just a policy choice each redistricting cycle. So this, again, is something that folks could weigh in on either now or during the redistricting process itself.
So the State League actually worked to get legislation filed last session with Eric Johnson, a representative out of Dallas. It was a prison gerrymandering bill. That is what you refer to this process as. So right now, what the Census Bureau is going to do with that prison population is they're going to allocate those prisoners and count them at the prison where they're located. So districts like Representative Cody Harris out of Huntsville, or up in that region, there's another one over there, and I can't remember who it is. Their districts, about 10 to 15% of their district is prison population. So it negatively impacts the quality of the representation of those constituents, and it gives that district an outweighted voice. So people in those districts have 10% more voting power than everyone else in the state, and that's going to impact both Democrats and Republicans alike. And so we pushed hard again to get legislation passed last session. Representative King, the chairman of the committee, was also interested in addressing it, but push comes to shove, and he didn't want to do anything at the end.
I want to go back a second to the issue of counting the undocumented. Senator Menendez, if someone goes into one of your offices, do you ask your staff to ask them about their immigration status before you offer them any services?
Absolutely not. No,
So regardless of the count, in terms of the people you represent, if the undocumented are not counted, you're going to have to represent them, and you're going to have more people in your district than other senators have.
Well, here's another question I don't ask people when they come in with a problem. Are you a Democrat or Republican? Are you an independent? Do you vote? Do you not vote? How do you pray? Are you straight? Are you gay? No, I don't ask any of these questions, right? What's the problem and how can we help you? So the other thing that's offensive is that, the Supreme Court's decided that we're going to be, in my opinion, a forward-thinking, intelligent country, and we're going to educate children when they show up in our schools, because we know that we either educate them now or we incarcerate them later. So now there are questions. Now there are questions about that. People are bringing these issues up, and yesterday the governor tweeted that was a liberal decision by a liberal Supreme Court. It's so sad to see the short-sightedness of this. Where do we end up? This is a country built by immigrants. It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Okay. Listen, we're running short on time. I wanted to give each one of our speakers a little 2-minute final statement. So to make sure that any issues that have come up they haven't had a chance to address, they can do. I know it's hard, especially for lawyers, to speak 2 minutes. Except for me. Okay, so Dr. Sines, I think I'm going to begin with you. If you have like a final observations on what we've covered today, and we'll go right down the line here.
So as you can see, the issue having to do with redistricting. One of the things that we've been talking about Texas, but we're also in terms of San Antonio, the similar kind of trends that you're seeing here in San Antonio. The data suggesting, for example, that here in San Antonio, about 92% of the growth will be due to the non-white population. Again, primarily Latino, 72%, and about 15% for African Americans. But we see these similar trends in Dallas. We see it also in Houston. The one place that is a little bit different is Austin, thanks to gentrification that has taken place. There's where you really have one that differs. I think non-whites account for about 60% of the growth, whites for about 40% of the growth. But that is one metropolitan area that differs from the other. So these are trends that we see. The population increases, and what is going to be the outcome? We've seen it in the past. I think our voices need to come together, the pressure and so forth, to try to make sure that we have more equitable representation.
Jose?
So first, let me thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me to this forum. I appreciate that. And thank you to all of the rest of you here who have participated in this. Those were very intelligent questions, and we all appreciate your input on this. Frederick Douglass said, power gives nothing without demand. In my career, I've taken that to mean I have to sue everybody. But there's another way, the way that the League of Women Voters is proceeding and asking for reforms. I don't necessarily agree with all of the proposals that are being put on the table, but I think it's important for citizens to participate in the political process and make intelligent demands on our elected officials. So thank you.
Two observations, I guess, from this last legislative session. I think it's certainly an uphill battle to try to get a fair redistricting process out of Texas. But two things that Senator Menendez worked on and was supportive this last session. We saw the Secretary of State's office attempt this voter purge of folks that they were claiming could be non-citizens, but in reality were citizens, and they just used a poor process. And it was a new Secretary of State that came in and did this. And on the legal side, we represented the League of Women Voters, and MALDEF, and LULAC was involved, and we succeeded in stopping that. But, I think I don't think there had ever been a gubernatorial nomination not confirmed, and it just was sort of an unheard of thing. But the senators, because of public demand, came together and coalesced and said they weren't going to stand for somebody who came in on day one and tried this and was unapologetic about it. And similarly, there was a Senate Bill 9, that would have done a lot to criminalize voting, over-criminalize voting, make it harder for disabled and elderly people to vote. And again, this was a top priority of the leadership, but with public participation, we ran a committee hearing past midnight on it on the House side. We were able to coalesce and defeat that, and I don't think anybody going into that battle thought we'd be successful on that. So it does make a difference participating.
Thank you. Stephanie?
So, as you've heard from all of the stories up here, it's important for us to be involved, especially right now. So on that note, though, please stick around the next 45 minutes or so, going up until the noon hour. We're going to be doing just a basic 101 on redistricting and walking you guys through how to prepare testimony. That's how you can make a difference right now. please stick around. But all of these stories are very impactful, and things are really bad right now. I think that's probably why you guys are here. We need your help. We need to be collectively fighting back, so please stick around to help.
Senator?
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to League of Women Voters. Thank you to Nowcast for making this possible, not just for those of us here, but everybody that can watch later, now and later, if you want to go back and hear the coverage. Look, many times, I've been told that stories tug at the heart, but often many people don't think of that as data or analytics. Now, data can be informative, but many people find it boring. So, but when you combine data with a story, now you have something that possibly can compel action. This is where you can come into place. We need to have a combination of, sometimes we call it a 1-2 punch. No, most news coverage and money pours into federal elections, a presidential, everybody gets excited about that, U.S. Senate, Congress, but you know what people don't realize is that local state elections is what influences gerrymandering to a large extent. Who is your state representative makes a big difference. We're 9 seats away from possibly having a balanced legislature where there'd be some checks and balances. If we could take control of the Texas House, then now you have to have some maps that at least make sense, or we won't have them at all. We have to think about this long term. And just as if you didn't already know how bad gerrymandering is, let's talk about it. Protects incumbents, not always a good thing. Limits competition, increases polarization, a very bad thing, creates odd-shaped districts to capture the desired results. And the worst thing, it robs the voters of their choice. It's the politicians choosing the voters, not the voters choosing the elected official. Just as a part of information, there's going to be a redistricting House Committee hearing in San Antonio on September 12th. Representative Ina Minjares is on that. And the first Senate committee will be October 29th at 9 a.m. in the Capitol. And we'll be happy to provide you more information as you need it. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the League, I want to thank you all very much for being here. Wonderful questions. Please stay. Ms. Minuk is going to give you some remarks about this next step. And I thought the questions were good. The panelists are wonderful, and I enjoyed it very much. Thank you all.
I think Al has made half my speech. I was going to say the same thing, so I will not repeat. We do want to thank the panelists for joining us and sharing your expertise and your, experiences with all of us. Thank you all for joining us. And I also want to thank Professor Kaufman for moderating this important forum. If you had submitted a question that did not get answered, please feel free to come and ask any one of, you can talk to them. But please do stay for the second session, this was just the warm-up. The next session is really how to, you can participate and make a difference. So the breakout session will be next. That will be led by Stephanie Swanson. So please do stay, and she will be giving the instructions for that. So I just want to close the first panel discussion for now. Thank you all.